It's time for the Maximum PC No BS podcast, episode 242 for the week of January 11th, 2016. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about CES, the price of the Oculus Rift, NVMe, and Polaris. All that and more is coming up right now. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Jimmy Thing, and joining me are Associate Editor Alex Campbell.
Hi there.
And we have Senior Editor Jared Walden calling from his satellite office in Washington.
Hey, guys.
And Tuan Nguyen couldn't be here, unfortunately. But let's go ahead and get started with our first topic. Last week was CES. And I would say the biggest news from CES, at least from what I saw, was the price of the Oculus Rift. It's going to be $599. It's going to be shipping beginning March 28th. And the internet sort of blew up with the reaction that it was too expensive. And, because originally Oculus was targeting a $350 to $400 price range, which is something that Palmer Luckey said, I don't know, a year or two ago. But I wanted to get your guys' feedback. Do you guys think that's too expensive? Do you think it's fair? How do you guys sit with that?
Well, if they were targeting a $400 price range and it's $600, that's 50% more, actually, which is a pretty big jump, in my view. I think that frankly, if they were to price it a little bit lower, they'd probably move more units. After we published a story on our website and posted it to social media, I did notice a lot of our readers did actually react quite negatively. People said, I was excited about it, but with $600, no, they're going to pass it up. So I think that could be a little bit of a flub on the part of Facebook and Oculus VR. The true believers will still probably get it, probably adopt it early, but I think a lot of people are going to wait until the technology matures and prices come down for all the headsets. That's my prediction for it.
Okay, what is your personal take, though?
My personal take is that I think the platform is really awesome. It has a lot of potential for a lot of things. I do think $600 is still a lot.
Yeah.
But you also have to consider that Oculus VR is an audio solution. It is a display. Mm-hmm. And
positional tracking, cameras, you got sensors.
Positional tracking, cameras, and it comes with input. It comes with a Xbox One controller.
Right.
So taking all those things together, $600 isn't completely unreasonable.
Yeah, there are monitors that cost that much or more.
You can get a 1440p monitor that costs that much or more. Yeah, easily. So you basically have two high resolution monitors, high DPI monitors because they're tiny, going right over your face. So in that sense, I think that what Oculus and Facebook said that it's fairly priced for the technology. I'm like, yeah, but if you're aiming this at consumers and gamers, it's still a really high bar. I understand where they're coming from a technical standpoint, but in terms of actual deployable, in terms of price, I think that they would have seen higher returns maybe by moving more units with a lower price.
I kind of wonder if they didn't intentionally put the price higher than it needed to be just to keep it more towards the enthusiast segment initially, because if you get right down to it, the people who buy this and have a minimum spec Oculus system with a single 970 or a single R9 290 or whatever, they're probably not going to have that great of an experience anyway. And the number of Oculus titles that we'll see in the next year or so is pretty limited initially. So by pricing it a little bit higher, they get that, the early adopters come in first. They're more likely to be forgiving because, I tried DK1, I tried DK2, I tried Crescent Bay, and then I think at the AMD event that they had in December, they actually had the pretty much final Oculus hardware, and there was some pretty serious gains in quality. Like DK1 was terrible to set up and get working. DK2 wasn't really much better. I never actually personally tried to get Crescent Bay up and running, but I know at an NVIDIA event, they had it running in their hotel suite, or not hotel suite, but conference room, and someone shut off the machine that night, and the next day I heard, oh yeah, they couldn't get it working again. So even as recent as Crescent Bay back in the fall or summertime, they were having problems with, you get it working, and then when you turn off your computer and turn it back on, things go to pot. So I think if they've fixed all of that stuff and the headset's definitely more comfortable and it feels like a premium quality now compared to what, DK2 felt pretty chintzy, I can see the $600 price tag. And, I think the people who are really interested in this, they're going to have a $600 graphics card or two. They're going to have a high-end system, and they're more willing to take that plunge. And by the time the price gets down to like $300, $400 or less, you're going to have way more apps and software available. And then the mainstream consumer comes along and goes, oh, this is great. I can buy this and I've got 50 apps instead of 5.
Right. I think that in terms of, as far as the mass market consuming VR, I still think that right now, Samsung Gear VR, for people who have Samsung phones, obviously, that can run it, is still probably the better bet because of its lower barrier to entry. I think there's more content for it. And frankly, I think that since it is a consumer device that's got lower specs, you're probably likely to see more content for that sooner than the really high end, than the Rift, because like Jared said, it is really an enthusiast product at this point. So it's going to be early adopters, enthusiasts, people who really, really, really want to get into VR gaming early. But as the technology matures, and prices will eventually come down because there's going to be competitors. The Vive was just announced today that pre-orders are going to go on Leap Day, so February 29th. So as the market gets saturated with more headsets, I think that we're going to see prices come down when there's more than one game in town, and as they start to compete in terms of content and capability.
Yeah, I think it's sort of following a similar trend to the smartphone market. I remember when the first iPhone first came out, it was like $600, $700 or whatever. Now you can get like smartphones that are competent and way better than the original iPhone for like $200, right?
Yeah. I mean, the OnePlus One, for instance, is still, I've got one of those, and it's like, it's like $300, and it wasn't quite. They kind of build it as like as a flagship killer. It's not quite a flagship killer,
but it's still like
but it's a really competent phone.
Yeah.
It's a premium phone unlocked for a reasonable price.
Right.
So you're not paying $600, $700 for the phone. You get a lot of the higher end features that you would get in other phones. So I think that we're going to see that with VR headsets going forward. It's just that it's so early in the game. I think that VR is going to establish itself as a big new medium in 2016. But in terms
it's not going to be mainstream for a while.
Right. And in terms of being mainstream price-wise, I don't think it's going to be there quite yet. I think the Gear VR is probably the best bet to get.
Assuming you have like a latest Samsung phone,
the barrier to entry is the the $600 Samsung phone you need for it. So that's the barrier to entry. So in effect, a Gear VR really is going to be about the same as the Rift by itself if you don't have a Samsung phone that's already capable.
Right.
Yeah, and then there's the big question, like how much will the Vive cost when it comes out?
Yeah. Well, so I woke up 8 a.m. as the pre-orders opened up 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I was in Vegas at the time. And woke up to do the pre-order, and you see the price. It's like, wait, I just like did a double take. I'm like, whoa, $600. Like that's I thought it was gonna be like $400 or something. and I was talking to Wesley Finland, the PC Gamer hardware editor, and he was like, if the Oculus Rift is $600, like I wonder how much the Vive is gonna cost. And we know that the Vive. Well, we can assume that the Vive will cost more because HTC and Valve have said that they are targeting a higher end VR experience. I mean, you can obviously tell from like the room scale stuff. They have the 2 lighthouses. They're shipping with their controllers
and the constellation on there, so you can see it's got better motion tracking.
And they're having a front facing camera. All of that sounds very expensive. So I'm a little bit worried about that one.
I'm betting $1,000.
I'm thinking $999. That's what I'm thinking now. I'm hoping that it's gonna be like 800, which is kind of weird to say that I'm hoping it's gonna be 800. But I have a feeling that it's gonna be about $1,000.
Yeah, I think that it's 2016 now. Give it 2 years to 2018. Maybe at the outset, 2020 at the longest, I think VR will be much more common, much more affordable.
Yeah, sure.
And be available across way more platforms and devices. So, the smartphone VR will be available across way more devices. I mean, there's already that headset, the Carl Zeiss headset that's built for several different phones.
Cardboard and stuff like
Google
that.
Cardboard. So as those get more refined, I think we're going to see VR take off on different platforms that aren't so exclusive to specific hardware. And I think that, in terms of gaming, first of all, gaming hardware gets cheaper over time. Mm-hmm. So, even with the Oculus Rift, in 2-3 years, how much is a 980 going to cost versus what it costs now?
Right, or performance like
right, something that's 970 or higher. What will that cost in 2 or 3 years? Because once that barrier comes down, then you can actually, then the hardware barrier comes down, then it becomes cheaper for everybody. So there's that to look forward to. But I don't think that for, the average college student is not going to be able to really justify affording it right now. But if you're early 30s or late 20s if you're the type of person who has a really high-end gaming machine, yeah, you might foot the bill if you're really that interested.
Yeah, I mean, it is about the price of like a high-end monitor or like a smartphone nowadays, right? So
right.
Yeah. So I think.
And there's still that question of software too, though. I am not sure what we're going to see on the software and the games and the other stuff, because like I've seen some really cool demos for Oculus Rift. I've seen some really cool demos for the Vive, and now I'm sitting there going, you don't really want game developers to make this exclusive for one platform or the other. That gets into the console mess where it's like, oh, well, this game came out for Xbox One and not for PlayStation 4. And I worry that we're going to see that same kind of crap happening with virtual reality. So it will be that Betamax VCR or Blu-ray versus HD DVD all over again, and one of the platforms, or maybe several of them, might struggle for a few years before finally throwing in the towel and going the way of the dodo bird, and that would kind of suck if you bought the wrong one.
Yeah, this was actually addressed when we talked to Razer for a different podcast that we just started. They actually brought up, I think it was OSVR, open source virtual reality, and their API for that. The idea behind Razer's idea for that was to develop an open source API for VR that would work obviously on their headset that they want you to buy, but it would be open source so that Oculus would be able to run it. So it would be kind of like what OpenGL is now. But hopefully better, so that, it will run it. It might not be as optimized for Oculus as the native Oculus API might, but it'll still be capable. So you could write once and then have it across HTC, Oculus, or any other vendor that builds a headset. So I think that open APIs could alleviate that. It's just a matter of convincing developers to use such an API and getting the hardware vendors to actually support it. If those two things happen, I think that might alleviate some of those problems. But that's not necessarily the case. We've already we've seen with SteamOS right now that using open APIs for gaming is easier said than done in terms of real world and applying it.
Things.
Yeah, it's a total chicken versus egg scenario right now. So long term, I think we're going to see VR and AR take off. I think I'm more bullish short term on the AR aspects, and I think Vive adding that front facing camera and the kind of pass through vision, that's a big step in the right direction too. So it'll be, I'm not sure which one's going to win out, but it's going to be an exciting 5 years or so.
Yeah, have you had a chance to try out HoloLens before, Jared?
I haven't actually been able to try HoloLens in person. I've seen it. Like, there was some Microsoft thing where they're like, you can see it, you can take pictures, but you can't try it on, and you can't, it was really weird.
Yeah, I got to
so that was as close as it got.
I got to try it at E3, and it's an interesting technology because right now there's only a small fraction of the actual lens that works, so it's not full peripheral vision like
it's like maybe 50, 60 degrees or something.
Right, like what they show in all the presentations, like the whole room. It's not like that yet.
FOV is like around 50.
Right, the FOV is really small, but at the same time,
it doesn't matter as much because it's not trying to. With VR, I think they're trying to bring you to like a virtual world, right?
They're trying to transport you to a different
so.
place. Augmented reality is trying to introduce things into the place you're already in. So, like Jared, I think that AR, I'm really bullish on that because I think there's a lot of industrial application, a lot of professional application in an office, and in addition to all the entertainment applications. Although I think that HoloLens is probably going to be a really expensive product, just like Oculus is for a consumer. But if you're a company who is building things and can use it for designs or to help a technician repair an aircraft or something, then you can completely justify that cost as a cost of doing business. Consumer, it's much harder to foot that bill for $1,000 headset and a system to do it. But I think HoloLens, whatever that's going to end up costing, it's going to be a lot more accessible to companies and industry. And Microsoft, they do a lot of professional stuff. So I think if you look at a lot of their advertising for that product, for HoloLens, a good half of it is for industrial and design use. If you look at it, they have the person who
fix a sink or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
Fix the sink. You have the guy who's working on the design for the motorcycle, and he can take it apart. Like that's got more. I think there's a lot more potential there. I mean, imagine a surgeon who can look up something while they're in surgery, a mechanic who can look up stuff while they're working on your car instead of stopping, looking something up on something else. They can keep their eyes on something, keep focused on what they're doing, but still glance up, read at something, and then move their hands.
Like I think I think it has real world applications for like the armed forces. I know you were in the armed forces, like detecting where, like let's say we have data on where we know landmines are, right? If you have soldiers out in the field, they can just put on the headset and be like, okay, don't go in these regions that are marked with red or something.
Right. I mean, and there's a lot of applications military-wise. If you can make it so that it's low power enough that it's human packable, with a small enough battery that's not too heavy, that's something where you can integrate a rangefinder into it. You could laser designate targets. You could do translation of text. So if you have someone's ID, right, and you look at their ID, or you can say, oh, this is this person's name. I can't read Arabic or Chinese or Russian or whatever language it is, or French, but it'll translate it into English and give you that translation like Google Translate right there. And it can actually.
It basically makes you RoboCop.
Right. It makes you Terminator or RoboCop, which is honestly, as a military person, it's. You wouldn't want everyone to have it because it is a bulky piece of equipment right now.
It's kind of heavy.
Yeah, it's kind of heavy. It's ungainly. The technology's not all there. So it'd be something that you'd have a designated person in your squad have, or the platoon have. But it's still something there's a really big industrial and military application for this technology. So I think AR, fighter pilots could use it, heads-up display, vehicle drivers. If there's so many roles that someone could use with this, that it's, I'm really bullish on that technology taking off on an industrial scale rather than the consumer. Consumer-wise, I'm more bullish on VR
Sure.
But industrial-wise and design-wise and, government, I think that AR is going to be probably the key technology that really changes stuff.
Yeah, I know Microsoft has said for a while now that HoloLens is going to be out, within the time frame of Windows 10. I don't quite buy that. I mean, Windows 10 has been out for some time now. And
Yeah.
there ain't no HoloLens in the office.
Well, when they say time frame of Windows 10, aren't they talking about during the lifespan of Windows 10? Like,
I don't know. How do you define like they said? I think the quote was Windows 10 launch time frame.
Oh yeah, then they've missed that.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Maybe within the time where Windows 10 is still a free upgrade, so they've still got until July 29th.
See, I don't see AR coming out for at least another year or so.
You don't think HoloLens will be out this year?
When I tested it, I tested it at E3, it did not feel like this was light enough, that it was portable enough.
Yeah.
That the field of view it didn't feel immersive enough to be a released product. It was really, that's nothing to take away from the technology. It was really impressive technology.
Amazing, yeah.
It was amazing, but it felt like it definitely felt like a work in progress. It was definitely like a beta product.
It was the HoloLens equivalent of DK1, right?
Yes, that's exactly how I would describe it. Like where you look through it and you can see like, wow, this has a lot of potential, but ergonomically it's not ready yet.
Right.
They're also it's a difficult challenge because they're fitting a whole entire x86 computer on your head that's battery powered. So you're gonna like suffer from performance issues and battery life issues.
Right, and that's one of my
and also
main
ergonomic
worries.
issues.
Yeah, that's one of my main worries. Is like, okay, where do you actually put the processor units? Where do you put the GPU? Where do you put this big honking battery if you want to get any decent life out of it? That's why I'm like, well, it has potential in a military use, but it's got a long way to go.
You just need your cybernetic arms and muscles so that you can carry your 200-pound
backpack.
AR.
Yeah, it's pretty much like you need you need to be a mech.
Indeed.
You need to be a mech pilot at this point.
Speaking of AR, I also want to talk about the updated HTC Vive, which I got to try as well. It does have a front-facing camera, and I think a lot of people are thinking that like, oh, it's kind of VR and AR. The answer is kind of. It has a pass-through camera, which the Samsung Gear VR has. I don't know if you tried it, Alex.
I tried the. What was it? The
pass-through mode.
Yeah, it was the pass-through mode, but it was on. It wasn't on the consumer Gear VR, but it was the one right before they released that one, the one they had during Oculus Connect. But yeah, the pass-through mode there's like I said, there's a lot of use for AR there. What I could see a consumer use for that is if you went to say to national park or a zoo or something, you could see, you could put on the headset and say, oh, here's more information about, what you're looking at, or going in a museum. I mean, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that would be more for like a headset that was not designed for AR, but I feel like the pass-through mode, both on the Gear VR and on the HTC Vive, is more, at this point, it's more for safety reasons.
Yeah.
So like if you have multiple cats in your house or something like that, and you're like walking around dancing or whatever, you don't accidentally kick one of them. So you just, with the Vive controller, you double tap a button and then you enable like the pass-through mode. The pass-through mode doesn't behave like it does on the Gear VR, and so the Gear VR, it uses your phone's, your Samsung phone's camera, and it just basically shows you the world around you. But with the Vive, it's very weird. Like if you've ever seen, how it looks is very strange. If you've ever seen Lord of the Rings and you've seen the scene where Frodo puts on the ring for the first time, you get sort of like this really weird hazy look, right?
That's weird.
And it's like that, except that like I think what he saw was like all in white, like things looked like they were in white. Here it's like blue. I don't know what the purpose of that that aesthetic is, but it's not very conducive to AR because it kind of makes your world look blue and kind of hazy.
I wonder if that's the camera or just software. They're just like, hey, let's make it blue.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But
well, aren't they trying to go for kind of a like a
Tron-like?
They don't want to. Well, a bit opaque, a bit transparent, so that you can still see the VR world, but you can also get an idea of what's around you in the physical world. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. But as it is right now, though, I feel like it's more for safety stuff. That doesn't mean that developers can't, implement some sort of AR like thing in there in the future. But yeah, it's not quite an AR headset, I'd say. So yeah, the new thing about the Vive system is the front-facing camera, which I've mentioned. They do have improved ergonomics on the headset and the controllers. The headset is supposed to be the headset's supposed to be a little bit lighter. To me, it's still too heavy. Not to say that it's like it hurts to wear, but like I don't think I'd want to wear that for like an hour. To me, it's a little bit heavier than the Gear VR, which to me is a little bit too heavy in and of itself. The Oculus, on the other hand, the Rift is really light and ergonomic. So I'd like to see HTC address that. They did make the controllers a little bit more round. I think I'm the only one here that's actually held the controllers. But they're basically like Wiimotes or something like that. So they've made it a little bit rounder, a little bit more ergonomic to hold. Not too many changes there. The lighthouses, which are the two little laser stations that you hang up on either end of your room, are also a little bit quieter this time around, although I didn't really notice the noises before. So you're seeing some small improvements to the system. But yeah, I just I want it to be a little bit lighter, and I also worry about the cable as well because HTC and Valve, they're pushing around the walking around stuff, and I always feel like I have to subconsciously be aware of the cable and as to not trip over it. But other than that, it's very promising. I feel like the Oculus is a little bit sharper. Even though on paper I think the resolutions are very similar, I think what Oculus is doing with the optics looks quite sharp. It's not like you can still see the pixels if you try. I think Alex, you tried the Oculus at Oculus Connect, right? What did you think of the resolution?
I thought that the Oculus Rift at Connect was actually quite good. So
it's I'd say it's good enough for like the first consumer version.
Right.
Obviously, there's room for improvement.
I think that since a lot of people, complain about the screen door, like you see pixels, like that's going to happen anytime you have a screen that close to you and you have lenses that are enhancing the image. If you really think about what's going on,
yeah.
That's just an issue of like how close can you really pack physical pixels next to each other on a screen,
right?
And that's really hard right now, So,
from my understanding, like, in order for us to not be able to discern any pixels, it'd have to be like 8K by 8K or something like that.
Right. You're basically looking. It's like you have a pair of glasses, like reading glasses on, and you're looking at a cell phone screen, like really close to you. That's kind of what you're doing.
Right.
So you're going to get a little bit of screen door. The fact that they've got enough pixel density to make it acceptable is amazing by itself.
Yeah.
So I'm not too upset about that. A lot of people complain about it. I'm not upset about it. The idea, some people say, oh, it makes me feel sick. I think the only time I've felt at all uneasy, working with the Rift is when the camera is moving and I'm not. So there are a couple demos where it transports you, but you're standing still. That makes me feel weird.
Yeah.
And I don't think the term nauseous is right.
It's a motion sickness.
Yeah,
right?
it's like a weird out of body type of motion sickness type of thing. But it's just a matter of like you having the sensation of moving while you're not.
Yeah.
So your inner ear messes with you.
Your mind thinks you're moving, but your body isn't sending those signals to your
Your inner ear is not matching what your mind thinks you're doing. Yeah. So there's like a bit of a disconnect. So you have this, this mind-body disconnection, which is kind of weird.
Yeah. I did experience motion sickness a little bit in Valkyrie. When you're doing the barrel rolls, you don't have to do the barrel rolls. I think you use like the shoulder buttons to do barrels. And then it's kind of interesting that they chose that as one of the launch titles or like a game that would ship free if you pre-order, because I feel like you kind of have to have a tough stomach for that one.
For Valkyrie?
A little bit.
I actually had less of a problem with Valkyrie. I think part of it is because, if you look at...
Did you barrel roll?
I think so, yeah. I did barrel like bat left and right and bank and turn. Mm-hmm. So I think the big thing with that was since you can look down and see your legs, in game.
And that's legs in quotation marks for this.
Air quotes for legs. You can see the pilot's legs or your legs in the game. The sensation that you're sitting in a zero gravity environment. And, so that means any direction you look, it doesn't really matter what's up and down. So to me, it didn't feel as unsettling as the other demo. I think it was Monument Valley or something where it moved. I can't remember what the name of the demo was, but you moved from place to place. So you looked at like a location and it would move the camera there.
Yeah.
That to me was much more disconcerting than playing Eve Valkyrie, where I was sitting and I would look around, and I could move the spacecraft and I'd be looking, up and to my right, and I would just track what I'm looking at and move the spacecraft to align to it. So it did what I kind of expected it to do. So I think that if you're just looking dead forward and you're barrel rolling and doing things like that, I could see the motion sickness a little bit. But if you kind of track objects and kind of move towards it, it's, I think it's...
And everybody's going to be a little bit different.
Right. I mean, you're not going to... If you're piloting like a real jet aircraft, you're going to feel a little woozy in that too. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a simulator. So, I mean, what do you really want? Do you want that experience or do you not? I mean, you can look at a screen, but you're not going to have the same experience as sitting in a cockpit. And I thought that demo was really convincing in that you're sitting in a cockpit. You can see your wings and your guns on either side. You can look up through your canopy. You can roll your aircraft and kind of look around and track, objects as they move in front of you. So, the fact that that's coming out with the Oculus Rift, I think, is actually a really good
Showcase.
game to ship with. Okay. Not everyone will like it because not everyone likes flight combat sims. Some people might just get woozy from regular flight combat sims or first-person games in general.
Yeah, I have friends that like.
I know people who just can't play first-person shooters. It makes them, dizzy. Mm-hmm. So, each person's going to be slightly different there.
I think Eve Valkyrie is going to be more like, I remember Descent, the old 6 Degrees of Freedom shooter from the 90s, and I played a lot of first-person shooters before and after that never really bothered me. But Descent, at first, it took a little bit of getting used to because of all the barrel rolling and all that stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised that you'll have more mixed results with people liking Eve Valkyrie simply from the sickness aspect. But at the end of the day, I think if they create a good, compelling game, you're still going to get a lot of people who will figure out ways to play it.
Just take Dramamine or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know people who do that for first-person shooters, even just on a regular screen. So
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, just imagine like when we transitioned from playing Doom, right, where you couldn't, you didn't have, you only had left, right, up, but you didn't have up and down.
Plane.
It was horizontal plane.
Yeah.
You had a three-dimensional space. You had a vertical space, but you couldn't look down. You couldn't look up. When we had Quake and even Duke Nukem 3D, you could look up, you could look down, and that was weird for a lot of people. Like a lot of people I know would play even Duke Nukem without the up and down looking because it was too much. So, and there's still people who think it's too much. So, this is kind of like another evolution of it. Some people will be fine with it. Some people will just say no thanks.
Okay. Well, moving on, other stuff that I saw at CES, wanted to bring up there's a new form factor from Intel, the mini-STX form factor. It's essentially going to be a motherboard that is smaller than mini-ITX, which is interesting because I think the maximum size is roughly 5 by 5 inches, which will allow you to build even smaller computers if mini-ITX was not small enough for you. So have you guys been following along with that, and what do you guys think about that form factor? The one downside to it is that it does not. The main downside is that it does not have a PCIe slot. It does have M.2, so you can put storage and things like that there.
Yeah, I think that's a limiting thing that I think a lot of people are going to. That makes it hard to make a gaming machine out of it.
Yeah.
But the form factor could be really promising in terms of workstations, things where you're not going to be too graphics intensive. Mm-hmm. So building little machines, even Steam machines, using integrated graphics,
Yeah, like Iris Pro or something.
Right, yeah, like Iris Pro, even AMD's integrated,
Well, no,
Radeon graphics
you wouldn't be able to
down
put
the
the
line.
AMD on there.
Well, you could. That's true. Yeah. I mean, but down the road with with AMD's new chips coming out with Zen, you don't know. There may be a form factor that, let's hope, aren't fingers crossed. It would be nice to see that too. Actually, from the AMD side, actually with all their APU chips, I'd be kind of surprised if they didn't have form factors that would conform to that.
I think they. I mean, I don't remember which event it was. I think it was maybe E3 2 years ago. They had like I want to say it was called the Nano, but that's their video card. Maybe they took the name Nano and replaced the name with something else.
What are you talking about? The form factors?
Yeah, it's like a really thin AMD system. I forget what it's called.
Oh, you're talking about Project Quantum or no?
No. It wasn't. It wasn't a gaming thing.
Oh.
It was like it was basically like AMD's NUC. I forget what it's called. But it was like the size of like a remote control for your TV. It was kind of that dimension. Mm-hmm. But I forget what it's called. So I think AMD they have the capability. I don't know if the thing ever released, but they have the capability of making really small systems.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing about these small form factors is that it does allow it allows vendors to make really interesting cases and forms.
Yeah.
Because
you can get up to 65 watts in that little thing, which is pretty decent amount of CPU.
You can get a lot of power coursing through it. Using for mini-STX, using ribbons so you don't have to have the video card stuck into the slot. You can put the video card somewhere else in the case. Is really, really interesting and opens up a lot of interesting forms that I think that kind of change the way people look at PCs. They don't, a lot of people look at a PC as a box on a desk or on the floor. But HTPCs, have a lot of potential in cases like that for living room gaming. Whether or not SteamOS is going to be the OS for that, maybe not. Maybe not yet. But I think that the idea of that form doesn't have to be limited to this old school box format. We've seen a lot of PCs that are starting to break away from that. A lot of cases that are really slim and breaking away from the formal ATX box. You need so many inches wide to accommodate a video card. Well, if you have a ribbon, you can put it somewhere else. This particular form factor, the lack of PCI Express.
Can you imagine if you could fit a PCI Express on there and then like throw on a Nano? That would be badass.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see a PCI Express on that form factor, even if you don't put the card on it, just for
could you even fit it though? Like, how long is a PCIe slot? I don't have a video card.
I think you need to have at least about I want to say it's about 6 inches.
Really? So, because
from the back of the motherboard, or like front, whatever you want to consider it. I don't know. From the I/O ports up to the end of the PCI Express slot with the clip, the Nano is about as short as you can make.
So it's about 6 inches.
A graphics card. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's not gonna really cut it then, because I think the motherboard has to be within 5-something inches.
But you could potentially. I mean, like the weird thing about these small form factors is there's always the solution of going proprietary, right? And you can always make things like crazy by saying, hey, we're going to do our own design. But then the problem is, if you make your own proprietary design, which is what the original small form factors often ended up doing, then if anything breaks, you have to go back to, whatever you had before. Oh, I need a replacement motherboard for this specific system from Shuttle, and nothing else will fit. But on the other hand, I'm like, I've built mini-STX systems. They're a pain in the butt to build, aren't they? Like,
they can be. It depends a lot on the case.
Alex is taking a like to building them.
Yeah,
I still hate building them.
They look cool.
Oh yeah,
they look awesome once you have it like all bundled up. But like cable managed, it's like a rat's nest in there.
Yeah, the last system we built was mini-STX. The last build that we did. And
that one, that was the Steam Machine one.
That was the Steam Machine.
That one you did a really.
So
nice
that's going to be
job
coming out March. That
issue? One was really clean, so you didn't.
The thing is like I said, because it used a L-shaped. It wasn't a ribbon, but it was an L-shaped bracket.
Yeah.
That came with the case, so that the video card was mounted so that was parallel with the motherboard, right, in a different compartment. So it had its own basically bay in the case, and it was parallel. So you have it in effect. You ended up with a case that's really slim, and since you don't have this big boxy design, you have other places to put your power cables and things like that. And if you have modular power supplies where you can remove all the cables you don't need, that takes away a lot of the clutter too.
Yeah.
So you can get cleaner mini-ITX builds, but you have to be really, have to have a lot of discretion about what case you use, what power supply you use. I would always say this is like the prime place for M.2, even though NVMe might be a little high and high and to the right for a lot of these builds. Even if you go with the SATA speed in M.2 drives, the fact that you don't have a power cable or SATA cable running through the case is a little less mess. Mm-hmm. So I tell, I'm quick to tell readers now that if you're building a mini-ITX case or a mini-ITX system, going with M.2, an M.2 SSD will save you on mess and is probably one of the better choices you can make, even though you're only getting the same SATA speed you'd get with a SATA drive. Yeah. The Samsung 850 EVO M.2 is on par. It's only a few dollars difference from the 2.5-inch 850 EVO. So really, and all other things being equal, if you have an M.2 slot, go with the M.2 drive. It's going to consume a little less power, I think.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think M.2 is a little less power consumption. Not 100% sure on that, but it definitely is going to take up less space, and it's definitely going to save you on wiring.
Sure.
So, all other things being equal, use the M.2. I think it's one of the most interesting things to happen in case building. And the mini-ITX form factor, I've seen several mini-ITX motherboards where the M.2 is actually on the back side of the board. So it doesn't take any real estate, away from your PCI Express or
although that
RAM.
probably makes swapping out storage like pain in the butt.
It makes it a royal pain in the butt. So
disassemble your whole system.
You have to decide early, I have to put this in. It also means that when you actually install the system, you have to think, I better put in my M.2 SSD before I attach my motherboard to the case, because the way I've always built is put in the motherboard,
storage is like one of the last things you worry about.
Storage
right?
is like your afterthought. Okay, I'm going to add my storage now. No, now it's got to be storage first, then motherboard into the case, into the chassis. So small form factor, I think, is really fascinating. It's fun. It opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of what you can do, what PCs will look like.
Yeah, definitely.
This new form factor is great, I think, for really small workstations.
And laptops, too. They're making laptops thinner.
Yeah, it's really great. It's challenging, yes. It can be a pain in the butt, but if you select parts properly and you take some care and you really look at stuff, it can be a lot of fun, and you can really get some interesting builds out of it. So, I'm excited for the new form factor.
So the next sort of wacky thing, and Alex and I were talking about this morning, the next wacky thing that I saw at CES was a water-cooled power supply.
Sweet.
I don't know, Jared, if you saw this one, but Deep Cool is playing around with the idea of working on a water-cooled power supply, and there's no fan on it. Surprisingly, the power supply is still pretty big from what I saw, from the 650 watt. But it will work with any reservoir or radiator that you have in your system. What do you guys think about that?
I don't think
strange.
Thermally, I don't think power supplies nowadays are as big of a thermal concern as they once used to be. I think since they're, a lot of them draw in air from outside the case because you mount them upside down now with the fan on the bottom, in a lot of modern cases anyway, and they blow the air out the back. So that air will never really hit the inside of the case. It's getting its cooling air from outside the case, and it blows it right back out.
Yeah, so if you stick the power supply onto the same loop as all of your other graphics card and CPU and chipset or whatever else you've got going on, it's like technically you may actually make your whole system run warmer than if you had a power supply on its own.
So
thing.
I asked them, like, you know, when I was at their Sweden CES, I was like, so what is the point of this? And they're like, we don't know. And
we don't know. We just made it.
Yeah, they're like, I got the impression that they're like, we have water-cooled CPUs, water-cooled video cards, water-cooled motherboards. So what else can you? I'm not sure if there's water-cooled RAM, but there's like, there's no water-cooled power supply.
It's existed before. I know it has existed before.
Yeah. Okay. But it's like, let's try this wacky idea, and I guess they can get it working, but they're still iffy on like whether or not they want to actually produce it and release it as a consumer thing.
The way I look at it is like, okay, if you water cool the power supply, any efficiency you're likely to get out of that is going to be burnt up by running the pump anyway. Right.
I mean, I really don't think
you have additional power draw from the pump.
There is one potential benefit. Like you get to you put all of your cooling in one spot, and I mean, like the bottom mounted PSU fans it's a nice idea, but you know, most of us, if you have them sitting onto the floor, your case is going to be sucking up your carpet or at least dust from the floor, and so, I mean, I can see there being some fringe benefits that might not be all that bad, but I'm not super keen on water cooling in general. Not that I don't like it, but I'm lazy, so I'm like, I build my system, and a closed loop cooler on the CPU is great, but I swap graphics cards way too frequently to want to deal with like worrying about water blocks and cost and swapping out the cooling plate on my GPU. And if I had to do that for the power supply as well, or just one more thing to get in the way, I'm like, that's not for me.
And also, it's like, heaven forbid, like there'd be a leakage over the power supply.
Yeah, that's the last place you want to
water and electricity, not very good.
I mean, it's bad enough you fry your motherboard, but if you got it like right next to your transformers and stuff coming from the wall, you're like, that can
be a safety hazard.
Yeah. You're asking for fires.
Hey, but it's water cooled. All right, so I think one thing that, Jared, I know you wanted to talk about was Polaris, which is AMD's new architecture. So why don't you go ahead and delve into that?
Yeah, so Polaris is, that's they're shooting for the stars or whatever. And the interesting thing is, like, AMD is telling us about Polaris 6 months before the first product is really set to launch. They're talking about, around the middle of this year. But they had working silicon back in December that they showed us, and they had some demos running, but they were very staged demos. Like, you couldn't sit there and go hands-on and dig in. They wouldn't let us take a picture of the chip, but Raja Koduri, he had a little chip that's presumably broken, but he was carrying it around, and he let us look at it. And the actual GPU die on the chip was like about the size of a dime. So like 100 millimeter squared, maybe 120 millimeter squared, really small chip. But that also means this is obviously their low end part for the next generation graphics. So it looks like they're probably looking at GTX 950 levels of performance, give or take, but using maybe half as much power as the 950. So, certainly a sub 75 watt GPU running at decent frame rates for 1080p, and that's pretty cool. I'm more interested in seeing what they do on the high end, and the other thing that I guess we should throw out there. So the chip they showed was built on GlobalFoundries 14 nanometer FinFET, which is Samsung's licensed 14 nanometer FinFET. So
moving from 22, right?
From 28.
28, okay.
So they went from 28 all the way down to 14 nanometer, which is a huge jump. I mean, normally, like 50%. We went from, if you want to go graphics, we went from 65 to 55 to 40. We stalled that 40 a little bit longer because they used to do half steps. So 65 to 50 was a half step, and then down to 40 was another sort of half step, whereas Intel went from 65 to 45 to 32. And so the graphics cards stalled at 40 nanometer for a while. Then they jumped to 28 nanometer, which was a full step. Then they skipped 20, which was kind of a half step. And then they've gone to 16 and 14, which is like a full step from 20 and more than a full step from from the 28. So it's it's going to be a huge jump in terms of efficiency, and FinFET means like leakage goes way down and all these benefits. And so it's almost like a 1.5 step in process technology. And AMD was throwing around 2 times increase in performance per watt, which means either you have
that's
the same
compared
performance.
to the GCN, right?
Well, yeah, GCM, but they're saying, power from the 14 nanometer FinFET, 2 times performance per watt, roughly, meaning, you either have the same performance as an existing part with half the power, or you have potentially twice the performance with the same power.
Power draw, yeah.
And I think we'll eventually see both, but the first parts being demoed were the low power parts because those are smaller and easier to make and test the process, get comfortable with the process, and then you scale up to bigger chips. But there's this big question, which is, all right, AMD's got Polaris. We know it's working, but when are they going to release the faster versions of Polaris? Is it going to come 2016? Is it going to come next year? Will it be sort of in between? And they've said they will make some GPUs using TSMC's 16 nanometer FinFET. So it's like, well, you don't really want to do the same design on 2 different processes. So we might actually see like low end and mid range on 14 nanometer, and then like their Halo product on 16 nanometer. So it's all still a bit up in the air, but I expect by the fall of this year we're going to see something substantially faster than Fury X and Titan X from the graphics cards companies, and that'll be nice because really Titan X and 980 Ti and Fury X and even the Fury are all pretty limited by power. Like their TDP is 250 to 275 watts, and they could have made a faster chip if they used more power, but they're kind of power constrained. So with 14 nanometer, 16 nanometer FinFET, we're going to see a big jump in performance simply because we can double the performance per watt, which means double the performance at the same wattage.
Yeah, so I actually had a chance to visit AMD while I was at CES, and I did get an actual small demonstration of Polaris in action. So they showed their Polaris chip. I assume it's probably the same one that they showed you, and they compared it to a GTX 950, and all we saw was power draw. So I think they had it set up so that they were playing Star Wars Battlefront at 60 frames per second, 1080p on like medium settings or something like that. So on one hand, you on the left.
And this is also one of the caveats, right? Is AMD has technology in their drivers and hardware now where if you are running faster than VSync, they can kick in a lot of power savings, and NVIDIA probably does as well, but I don't know who's truly better there. So it could be by hitting 60 frames per second, like, their GPU may have been saving even more power versus the older NVIDIA GPU.
Yeah, true. So in this demo, they had GTX 950 on the left, 2 equally spec'd systems aside from the GPU, running the same monitor, the same game, and on the right was the Polaris chip, and then we saw the power draw of both systems, and on the NVIDIA system, the total system power draw was 145 watts. On AMD's setup, it was hovering around 85 watts. And we were getting comparable performance, so that's quite promising.
Yeah. The less power you're pulling, the less of that's escaping as heat waste as well. So it allows you to build a cooler system. So that's kind of exciting because one of the big things about people who are detractors to AMD's technology, they always call AMD's are heaters.
Sure.
They always complain about heat. And if you're drawing less power, that's less heat that's going to escape, because TDP actually refers to heat, not necessarily total power draw. So, which is a lot of people always forget about, but you can infer a larger power draw, the more heat's going to be created. So the fact that we're going to see cooler systems going forward is also really nice for overclockers. It's nice for form factor. So
the interesting thing is, like, when you talk about that system running, the AMD chip was using 85 watts or whatever, and that was with a desktop 4790K CPU. So I mean that's a pretty high-end CPU. The system, even when you're not playing a game, probably only idles at like 50 to 60 watts, right? So I'm like, you're only using 25 watts more power to run a real game at real frame rates. So, you could probably downsize to a mobile CPU and still not impact performance. So legitimately, Polaris could go into laptops, and we could see laptops that can play games at decent frame rates for 3+ hours. And I don't want to make it sound like AMD's the only one who can do that. I think it's just 14 nanometer FinFET is going to enable like some pretty major steps forward on power for all companies involved. So
that's unplugged playtime too.
Yeah. So I'm like,
that's a big plus.
We really haven't seen a decent gaming laptop that can play games for longer than 2 hours in my experience while unplugged. And I think with this finally leaving 28 nanometer behind, that we'll actually see the potential to get like 3, maybe even 4 hours on some systems. I'm skeptical of that, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's really promising to see on all fronts, really, in terms of battery life, performance, heat, form factor, VR. I mean, you could have like more portable VR systems, right? You can have it on laptops.
Right. I mean, if you're able to shrink down your process and you're able to have less heat, less power consumption, like we were talking earlier about augmented reality and having these headsets.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really promising. If you can push those pixels and do that video processing much cheaper on a headset, then that's really promising for other technologies. So it's not just gaming on the desktop that's going to benefit. It's going to be all these other technologies, especially wearable visual technologies, things that are going to go into smaller portable electronics. All of that will benefit from having a more efficient process and a cooler process, and less battery draw. All those things are a big plus for everything else.
So moving on, I think the last topic is, Jared, I believe you also want to talk about NVMe SSDs as well. So I'll give you the floor.
And not a whole lot to say, which was, I have to say, I'm disappointed at how little there was to say, because, NVMe it's a better interface standard than the old AHCI that we've been using with all SATA products for a decade or more. But if you look at NVMe, it increases the number of channels of what is it? There's like 65,000 command queues versus one command queue, 65,000 commands per queue versus the old AHCI had 32 commands per queue. There's more interrupts. There's no synchronization locking necessary, and it's the net result is it should be more efficient. Now, the reason for NVMe was mostly for servers as opposed to consumer. So that's where a lot of our super high-end enterprise stuff. But
hello, did we lose him?
I think we lost him.
Okay.
NVMe drives.
Oh, there
and
it
I
is.
thought, yes, we're going to see more. Well, I'm saying, that's what it feels like. So you've got on Samsung's got the 951, they've got the 950 Pro, and then Intel's got their SSD 750, and they've got like the enterprise versions of that, like I can't even remember the model numbers, P3700, P3500, something like that. But there were at least 3 new, mostly consumer-oriented drives announced at CES. You've got the Patriot Hellfire drive, and they're talking about 240, 480, and 960 gigabytes with 2,500 megabytes per second reads and 600 megabytes per second writes, which means that's pretty similar to Samsung's 950 Pro, really. In fact, I think those specs are almost identical, and they're looking at I don't know that Patriot announced how many IOPS, but I mean, more than any home consumer is likely to need. Then Plexstore talked about their M8PE, but I don't think they showed an M.2 version of that. It was only a expansion card slot. So specs on that were 270,000 IOPS read, 150K write, but they didn't talk bandwidth. So you kind of go, well, are they hiding something? I don't know. And then Plexstore is creating an NVMe version of the Predator, which when I initially reviewed, I screwed up and said it was NVMe, but it's not. So I'll be correct now. No, but they're saying almost 2,600 megabytes per second write, 1,350 megabyte per second read. So that could be a pretty impressive part. The thing that gets me with all these NVMe drives is like, technically it's pretty much the same type of flash memory they're using. So the only thing that's really changing is the controller. And they do need to put a lot of R&D work in to build a controller that uses the NVMe protocol, NVMe or NVM HCI, I guess, the non-volatile memory host controller interface. So that they did put effort into that, but the controller usually wasn't like the huge cost of a solid state drive. I mean, it might be like $20 to $50 or something. So if you had a 500 gig drive that was, $220 before making the NVMe version, it's like, well, how much more should the controller cost? Well, Samsung, you take their 950 Pro, and it's like they're the cheapest NVMe drive right now, and it's $350 for the NVMe 950 Pro 512 gigabyte. And so it's going to be interesting to see if this increased competition starts finally pushing NVMe drives down to the sub 50 cents per gigabyte range. I'm hoping we'll get to the point where NVMe is more like a 10 to 20% price premium, whereas right now it's almost a 2x price premium over your typical SATA drives. So, so those are the three new NVMe drives, consumer drives that I saw. You got
there's
HyperX,
a Zotac one too.
Oh, Zotac.
Yeah.
So and then it's like, well, who are the controllers, right? So Samsung's obviously their own controller maker, and Intel makes their own controllers, but like most of the other guys are either using Silicon Motion or Phison, or
I think most of them are using Phison. I know Patriot's using Phison, Zotac's using Phison. I don't know.
So the Patriot and Zotac are probably going to be virtually identical controllers, is my bet. But yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So we're hopefully at the next watershed moment where NVMe moves from being a really, really high end to a slightly more affordable high end in 2016.
By the way, I got I took a picture. I went to Patriot Suite and I took a picture of the specs of the Hellfire SSD. And for IOPS read, we get up to 200K IOPS, writes up to 140K.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, outside of a server, most people will never come anywhere close to pushing that many IOPS. So it's more this like, I mean, it's fast if you're copying files a lot, but even then I'm like, how many people on their home machines are routinely copying files other than for benchmarking purposes?
Well, yeah, I mean, IOPS are generally for lots of really small config files. They're for hits to a database where you're pulling lots of little bits of information here and there. Most home consumers are really more concerned about the sequential reads and writes, because when you read a file, you're reading that sequentially. You're not necessarily reading lots of random bits from all over the place.
Yeah. And it should be noted that we're now talking about M.2 form factor, like M.2 2280 or whatever it is, form factor that will have 1 terabyte class drives available. So that's kind of cool. Right now, there's only the 512 gig from Samsung's 950. So we'll shortly see 1 terabyte versions in M.2.
Nice. All right, let's move on to reader questions, or shall I say reader question. I kind of posted the questions like shortly before we started recording this. So I only have one, but Brian Billings on Facebook asks, OSVR 1.3 versus Oculus EV1 versus Vive. What were the experiences like in comparison with each other? So it's been a while since I've tried out OSVR, so I can't speak to the newest version. I know the latest version that I tried I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't too impressed. It was sort of akin to DK2 or something. The CV1 and the Vive, on the other hand, are much more ahead of the game, at least from what I tried at CES. As I sort of mentioned at the top of the show, I think that the Oculus seems to be a little sharper. It seems to have a slightly wider FOV, whereas the Vive is a little bit, I feel like it's a little bit taller. The Vive is more about getting your body into VR, so you can, you mount these lighthouses on either side of your room, and they give you these controllers so they can map out your hands in a one-to-one scenario. And you're like, I played like a Portal demo. You're like walking around Aperture, you're opening up file cabinets, you're like pulling levers, and there's like demos where you can like walk around a kitchen and open up drawers and pull out knives and fridges and things like that. So it's like really, when I say you're opening the things, like you're literally just like walking around a room, opening doors and things like that. It feels very convincing. The Oculus, on the other hand, is a more stationary experience. They're not really designing it so that you walk around. And there's ups and downs to that. The positive side for Oculus is that you don't have to worry about a cable so much, and you don't have to worry about like space.
There still is a cable. It's just
there is a cable, but you're not walking around, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And also some people worried about the space. Like, am I going to have room for 2 lighthouses? Where am I going to put those? And
right. The Oculus sensor like sits on your desk in front of you. It's pretty small and pretty inconspicuous. So
yeah. One concern that I do have about the Oculus is that it doesn't ship with the Oculus touch controllers. And I know you've tried that, Alex, right? And I think the reason is, Oculus has said that like game developers are used to programming or designing games with the Xbox controller in mind, so they didn't want to throw them into too unfamiliar territory. But my opinion is that this is like I want to engage with VR because it is a new experience. Like I want to leave the Xbox controller behind. And when you actually use the touch controllers, which are amazing, then you realize this is where it's at. And I don't think the Xbox controller is where it's at. And it's very motion sick inducing when you're like using the left analog stick to move around when you're not moving around yourself.
Yeah, I think there's some logic there in that. I guess you want to give developers enough time to get it right, because if they launch it with the headset and none of the content has it well implemented, then it just makes the controllers look bad, even though it could easily just be a code thing that someone just doesn't know how to implement it right yet. They haven't had enough time testing and doing the development cycle. So I could see the logic behind it, but I'm kind of on the fence. Well, should they have just delayed Oculus's launch so that they could get the touch to really work well first? And part of me thinks, well, with Vive, shorter in their heels,
they're basically releasing in the same month.
Right,
it's crazy.
Right. So I think maybe part of that logic might have been, hey, we've got to we got to get this out now so we can be the first kids on the block. Because this is they're not stupid. They know they're not going to be the only game in town. So making sure that they get their VR product first and try to get people familiar with their product first might have been just like a business decision more than, this is, we'd like touch, but, we're not going to do it because of upgrades down the road. I think it was more of, we want to get the headset out first, but it's not ready yet. So let's just ship it with something that we know works, that we know that, there's certain amounts of software that are packaged with it that already works with this. Make sure, it already works well with this. Let's not, have a buggy, beta or release candidate experience when we should be having an official release experience.
So conversely,
now OSVR actually has a front-facing camera that doesn't necessarily require controllers. At least that's my recollection when I tried it. And the thing is their front-facing camera had a terrible time picking up my hands. So like of the controllers that I've tried or the experiences, I would say the Vive still feels like the best overall experience when you've got the controllers. There was like a zombie shooter thing that I played the demo of.
You tried that? Yeah, I tried that
cool.
too. That one was really
That was
cool.
awesome.
That was awesome, yeah.
So I think the Vive might be the best, and I think Alex is right that Oculus might be going, oh crap, we got to get the Oculus, the first consumer official release out before the Vive, or that $1 billion acquisition of Oculus by Facebook might end up being a waste.
Yeah, so I think I understand what you guys are saying. That's a good point. So conversely, the flip side of the potential downside is that they might have a fragmented developer base, right? Because then it's like, well, do I design my game? If I'm a developer and I'm like working on a VR game or experience or whatever, do I count on my audience having the controller or not? Should I develop it for the Xbox controller or for this controller? Like, how many people are going to have the touch controllers? So it's whereas with the Vive, it's like, well, developers for that, it's like, okay, I know my standard controller. It's going to be like the VR control, the controllers that are designed for VR.
Yeah.
Whereas it's a little bit more muddled. And you kind of run a risk of fragmenting the developer
I think
scene.
that's a real risk, but there are lots of games that have support for keyboard and mouse, and then Xbox controller.
But it's a whole other beast to like design
maybe
something for one.
maybe a driving wheel and stick. So it is a big challenge. It's a lot more work for a developer to do that.
But I think it's like one is like, okay, well, like, this works for a controller, so we'll tweak it to work for keyboard and mouse. I think you kind of have to think about it differently when you're designing a controller for touch, Oculus Touch, right? It's like fundamentally like the whole game changes.
Right, because the character, you have to be able to animate, hands moving within the environment.
Right, exactly.
That's not an issue with any other controller. So
right,
I think that's a really unique
do I use WASD and a mouse to shoot, or do I like pretend like my audience is holding a gun and shooting? That's a very different thing. It's like you can't simply patch it in. It has to be like fundamentally designed from the ground up to either take advantage of that or not.
Yeah, I think in the same sense that in web design, for instance, you design for a lot of mobile, or a lot of modern web designs for mobile, and then scales up to desktop. You can see that in whether you're using Twitter Foundation or Zerb Foundation or whatever. If you design for, say you're designing a shooter and you need to animate player models and arms and weapons that can move around in front of the player, I think it's a lot easier probably to design for the Oculus Touch, where you can integrate that and then lock it center for the Xbox One controller, than to go the other way. You know what I mean? So if you design the whole game where it's going to be centered and locked in one position, it's harder to say, okay, from there I want to break it up and I want to make things move now. I think it would be easier to go, I want to make things move, or I can just lock it center and make a default. Have it default back, have a sane fallback to, this, instead of having it all move. So I think that's a unique challenge, since
it's hard. Like you played Bullet Train, right? I got the chance to try it out for the first time at CES. Super awesome game, I thought.
Yeah, super wicked awesome.
I thought it was like a blast. Cool. I was like smiling the whole entire time. And you played that with the touch controllers, right?
Right.
And it felt awesome. It felt great, like reloading the shotgun and all that stuff, and picking up the missiles and throwing it back. I don't think that works on an Xbox controller.
No,
I wouldn't want to play it.
It
on an
would
Xbox
not.
Controller.
The game mechanic. It's a very
I'm talking about like experiences like that, where it's like fundamentally designed to use touch. And I don't know. It's just it opens up a can of worms and challenges.
I think that you could make the game playable.
I think you can.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to play
have
it like that.
a button. One of the bumpers, picks up a bullet out of the air that you're looking at, and holds it, and then you can throw it back at what you're looking at.
Yeah.
It could make it work, but it's not as fun as having the touch controllers. It's not going to be as immersive.
Right.
It's not going to be quite the same game, but like I said, if you're designing it with the touch controllers in mind, I think you can probably make a sane fallback that, this person doesn't have touch controllers, let's at least give them basic functionality so they can play the game, but it's not going to be the full experience.
Yeah.
I mean, we do that with graphics already. You have all these special effects and things in games, but if you don't have a 980 Ti, you can't play like that.
Yeah, but that's the difference between like playing a game that looks pretty or not as pretty. Whereas here it's like, it's a fundamentally different game now.
Yeah.
Controls I think are going to make a bigger difference in the gaming experience than graphics quality.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I don't think you've tried out the bullet train or whatever it's called. The bullet train, I think, is it?
No, I haven't used the Oculus.
But
I haven't tried it.
It's very similar to the zombie shooting game that you tried.
Yeah.
Jared. So I mean, like. So could you imagine playing that with the Xbox controller? Like, it just wouldn't be the same.
No,
right?
it'd be totally different, especially with VR, where it's like you turn your head to look, right? And with the zombie shooter thing with the Vive, it's like, you look to your right and you point your hand out there with the controller, and you see the gun move over there, and you're like, it's really cool.
It's really cool. So, it's very similar because so I have Alex to my left. He tried out the bullet thing, and then you tried out the. They're both very similar. So it's like that.
Okay.
So I wouldn't really want to play that with the Xbox controller,
I mean, like I said, it would take away from the experience. Just like after playing Eve Valkyrie in VR, I would not want to play that on a screen with a joystick, just a joystick or just an Xbox controller sitting in front of a flat screen. Like, it takes away from the experience having done it the other way. It doesn't mean it's not playable, but it takes away from, the game can't realize its full potential and immersiveness that way.
Are we going to have a Eve Valkyrie multiplayer where you can play VR versus people who are not VR?
No. The game is exclusive to VR.
Okay, it is because it's like the old console versus PC, keyboard and mouse versus controller. Like, it'd be funny if the non-VR version, the people could actually play it better and.
So I actually think in this case, the VR people would have the advantage if you could do that, because you could look around your cockpit.
You could look
up, right?
Whereas look up and down. You could track your targets better, and then you could steer your ship better. If you just have a screen that's looking forward, you can't do that, and it's not going to be the same experience at all, and you're going to be severely hindered.
Right, but I think in first-person shooters, a keyboard and mouse user would have the advantage because of the mouses. You can just turn around.
Right.
My neck can only move so fast, whereas like my hands can like whip around really quick.
Whiplash.
Yeah. So.
But in terms of immersion of gameplay, I think it's a fair comparison in terms of immersion of gameplay. Like, you could feasibly play Eve Valkyrie without VR. Just on a regular screen using a controller or joystick or keyboard and mouse, whatever you're going to do. But you lose something. You lose immersion by not having it in VR. Just like you could feasibly play Bullet Train without Oculus Touch, but you lose the immersion.
It would be a crappy game.
It would be a completely different game.
It would be crappy.
Right. It would be a completely different game, and it wouldn't be nearly as satisfying.
Right.
So
it's like playing ping pong in VR, right? I got to play ping pong with Palmer in VR in the Oculus Toy Box demo. And like, we're holding our little, Oculus Touch controllers that basically acted as our ping pong paddles, and that was a blast. I have no interest in playing a ping pong game with an Xbox controller.
Exactly.
you know what I mean? So yeah.
Imagine Wii Sports without the Wiimote, right?
Exactly. Wii Sports with the Xbox controller.
You could feasibly play it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the
much
same
less
game,
compelling,
but you could do it.
Sure. Yeah.
It's feasible, so you can do it. But why would you want to?
Right.
So. Yeah, I think the Oculus Touch is going to be. I'm a little like you. I think it would be a lot better if Oculus would have shipped with Touch. Mm-hmm. But I think
which is now delayed till Q2.
Right. So I think part of that
H2 rather.
I think a lot of that might just be developers aren't ready for it yet, and rather than ship a bunch of products that aren't ready with it, so it's kind of a wonky experience. They're probably waiting. Okay, if we're going to ship this thing, we got to make sure that everything that's built to run with it, that it runs well.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't launch a new console with a buggy game that's going to ship with the console. So
at the same time, though, it's like you don't launch a new console and then it's like, hey, there's a new controller which is integral to the system that we launched like a year later.
I thought that's what. Didn't they do that with Kinect? I can't remember.
No, they did the opposite.
Okay.
So they released it with Kinect and then they like pulled it back. And
then
like nobody uses Kinect anymore.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I think this podcast is going on long enough. I think my laptop is about to die soon. So.
It is a gaming laptop. It has a very short life. It's got a desktop 980 in it.
Yes,
right?
and it's crazy. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. You can check us out online at www.maximumpc.com. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, subscribe to us on Google Play, iTunes, Kindle,
On Instagram now, too.
Oh, and Instagram.
Yeah, Maximum
What's
PC
our
Mag.
handle? Maximum PC Mag.
Yep.
Yeah, so on behalf of the Maximum PC crew, thank you for listening.